Welcome back to another edition of the Here We Go podcast. As Alexa's clicking right off next to me, sorry about that. As you can see, my co-host is not here today, so we have a special guest on, Zachary Smith. Smitty, how are you doing?
What's going on, Trent? My man, appreciate you having me back on. What is this, third time?
Third time, buddy. I appreciate coming.
I'm not sure how that applies into this situation, but
well, hopefully in off-season football, it's going to be a real good charm for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Because we really need some help.
Yeah.
So, a couple things we want to talk about today is going to be obviously the free agency process, the draft process, digging into kind of where we're at right now as a team. So I wanted to kind of start with some salary cap stuff. So I know it's not like the most exciting thing to certain people. But I want to talk about like some of the existing cap space that we're going to have to work from on 2025, and then also get into some potential cap space. So in case anybody doesn't know, the league is expecting the cap to be about $275 million. So it's obviously increased. I think it was like a 6% increase this year, something like that, if I remember reading that correctly. The Steelers are currently sitting with $40,463,766 in cap space, which actually is not bad. I mean, that's for the Steelers, that's decent, right? I mean, we're not used to being middle of the pack. We're used to kind of being in like this cap stricken type of way. So we can reportedly open up an additional cap space with restructures and cutting some contracts and things like that, get to up to about $85 to $90 million. So when you hear something like that, Smitty, how does that make you feel as a Steeler fan? Because I feel like it's been a long time since we've been in that situation.
Uncharted waters. Yeah, certainly. A lot of people, especially this offseason, I think because of the sour taste that's in the mouth of a lot of Steelers fans, it's just so negative towards everything. And they talked about, they're never going to spend in free agency. They're never going to do anything. I mean, they got to. They literally have to. The money is there that has to be spent. They're going to spend this money in some way, shape, or form, whether you agree with what they do or don't. It's going to be spent. They're going to be spenders in free agency. You mentioned what they're at now and what they could get to. I mean, that TJ extension is going to give them significantly more space. Cole Holcomb's going to be cut. Larry Ogunjobi could be cut. Preston Smith most definitely will be cut. Like, there's just so many ways that this team is going to create money this offseason that I see. They're going to be spenders in free agency for the first time in a long time. Now, the big question, obviously, that goes attached with that is, what does the QB contract that we're fitting into the 2025 team look like? Along with that, 24 free agents in total when you include unrestricted, restricted, and also 2 exclusive rights free agents that they have. But, when you go down the list, how many of those guys do we even expect to be back? Like, they're going to be players, certainly, in free agency.
Yeah, and it's really, like you said, it is uncharted territory, because as a Steeler fan, it's usually like, oh yeah, we signed some dude off of some team's practice squad, or like we got another rotational piece that is going to be in the background, or like it's never starters or low end starters. At one time,
agency signing ever. I mean,
yes,
they're going to, in my opinion, easily break that this offseason.
Yes, and that's actually what I was going to get to. How do you expect Umar Khan now in year 3 of offseason football to attack this maybe a little differently than what we've seen from Kevin Colbert? Is it just because we have the space? He may be a little more aggressive than what we're used to. Do you expect him to kind of write contracts similar to what we had seen in the past with Kevin Colbert, or do you think he's going to kind of break the mold a bit?
Well, I think there's going to be some breaking of the mold that needs to take place, just because I expect that I think they learned their lesson from last offseason, the way that they treated the wide receiver market. Real miscalculation. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have traded Deontay Johnson, but once they did, their plan afterwards, I don't know what the plan was. Like, that's the problem. Never addressing that up until they trade for Mike Williams, a 5th round pick straight up for Mike Williams at the trade deadline. And clearly that wasn't enough to fulfill the need that they had within that room. So I looked at the wide receiver position. I think that's the one thing where we kind of see them break tendency. Now, maybe to their credit, we should go back to last offseason and say, when you take a look at the Brandon Ayuk trade that didn't happen, maybe they were willing to break tendency a little bit. But I would have been curious, and we'll never know this, but what the plan was in terms of structuring that contract that Brandon Ayuk would have signed. Would they have been breaking the mold in that way? Because, I just mentioned the Patrick Queen deal. You look at that, Sure, it was their largest outside free agent contract that they've signed, but you look at the way that they structured it, it was really a 1-year deal, and I'm kind of curious to see what they do now with these
Yeah.
last, because like you look at how much money he's now making on the last 2 years of this as opposed to year one. They kind of set it up to be a very cuttable contract if they wanted. And that's kind of what they how they structure contracts. I don't know that Omar is going to get away from that, but if he's going to lure a big fish free agent receiver like a T. Higgins to Pittsburgh, that's the type of deal that they're going to have to do. That like they can't get away with the way that they've structured those in the past.
Yeah, I think you almost have to feel like if they're going to make a splash, which I hope they make a splash in this free agent market, and we're going to dive into some of that in a minute here. But I feel like you have to give some more guaranteed money than what they've done in the past. Like I feel like there's going to be some heavy guarantees if you're going to get the big fish. T. Higgins, being the prime example of that. Like if you're going to go get that guy and you're going to pry him out of Cincinnati and you're going to keep him away from probably some really high bidders, that dude's going to he's probably going to get more than people think. I don't think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I don't think it's going to just be at 30 million. Like I'd seen that spot track prediction thing, and it was like 20.6 or something. It was actually less than he made last year, and I'm like, there's no way. And then I'm like sitting there thinking about it, and I'm like, I don't think it's going to be 30 million. I think it's going to be over 30 million per year, right? 33, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe 35.
The one reason that I don't think what you're saying is off base is because I look at the wide receiver free agent class. I think there's some good players within there, even at the top as well. But you look at the guys behind him that are going to be coveted, like a Chris Godwin, like a Stephon Diggs, potentially, both coming off season-ending injuries. Like, so there's some question mark there. And I know that T hasn't necessarily been the most durable player himself, but he's not coming off like, an ACL tear like those two other guys are or anything like that. So yeah, I think he's far and away the most coveted receiver of this free agent class. You look at the way that receivers have been getting paid. The numbers that you're throwing out there, it wouldn't shock me if that's the case.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like it would be unusual for the Steelers to make that kind of a deal, but I feel like you have to. First of all, I'm not the biggest fan of the draft class coming in. I think it has a steep drop off. I think there's some first and second round guys, but if you don't get your guy in the first or second round, and we'll make some cases as to who's going to go where here, but I think it's a long way down. Personally, I don't think you're finding starting caliber guys in the third round. I think you're kind of getting into more developmental guys, or you're trying to hit on talent or something like that. So that's why I hope the team is way more aggressive than normal going after a guy like T. Higgins, because the free agency class isn't all that great either, or they're over 30 years old. So we're, pick your poison. That's kind of where I think that's going to go.
It's the age for me when I look at the free agent guys. I mean, I mentioned Stephon Diggs and Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin, he turns 29, but again, coming off a season-ending injury. You got Keenan Allen, who will be 33, Amari Cooper, who's going to be 31, Brandon Cooks, who will be 32. Not Deontay Johnson, probably not even worth bringing up. They're not going to go that route. DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, who was just here. Honestly, an interesting guy, Darius Slayton, who I think they wanted to trade for at the deadline last year. I think he'd be another one to bring up. If I were circling guys within free agency as like a top 3 for the Steelers, I think I would have T. Higgins up there. Know that they love him. I've heard from talking to a couple people, Chris Godwin, they would covet him as well. I don't know if Tampa lets him get away. Kind of has that same feel as Mike Evans does, where it's just like he's to be a one helmet guy. Darius Slayton, honestly, I'd have rounded out my top 3. I know that they wanted to trade for him last year, and New York wasn't willing to give him up.
Absolutely. So since we're headed that direction anyway, let's get into some of these free agents or draft picks. Let's kind of go through some team needs stuff, because I think I actually have the same top 3. I know Amari Cooper's name's kind of been thrown out there a little bit. I personally, I wouldn't really love that, but I actually would flip Chris Godwin and Darius Slayton. I think Slayton being younger, more durable. I guess I slept on him a bit for when he was in New York, because when the trade conversation started talking and picking some momentum up, I started really kind of looking up on him a little bit more. And he was bigger than I thought he was. He's a little faster than I thought he was, and I'm like, okay, he's not like this like smaller guy, because obviously we have an issue with that. Like we got dudes that are all 165 pounds in the wide receiver room, and now we're kind of missing half a wide receiver room due to free agency. So Darius Slayton's very intriguing to me. If you don't get T. Higgins, I think he'd be my number 2 on the list right now. So what are some of your biggest? Go ahead.
The other thing I want to say is we know how important this is for the Steelers, being that, this is the team that we follow and cover. He has torched them in their 2 most recent matches, and I think they always kind of circle those guys that have played well against them.
Yep, for sure. We did an episode the other day on Tuesday and talked about team needs a little bit, and we kind of ranked some top 5 stuff, and I did it based more around like the draft idea. But what are like your list of top team needs kind of going into free agency right now? Where do you think are some of the, doesn't even have to be top, just what are the team needs in your mind?
Oh, I mean, it'd probably be easier to say what they don't need. Obviously, quarterback's not checked yet. I expect one of the quarterbacks that played last year to be back, and we could talk about that. Running back, they're going to add one. I think that is probably a draft path for me. I've just been kind of thinking like they're going to take one on day 2 of the draft. I just think that's kind of set in stone. Wide receiver, obviously, you need somebody there. You could double dip there, whether it's one in the draft or one in free agency. That's kind of the way that I've been viewing that. A George Pickens trade would certainly mean that they're going to double dip at that position. Not talked about enough, just because I'm sticking on this side of the ball right now before I go to defense. On offense, I'll be honest, like I appreciate the effort, and I like the temperament that he plays with, and he over exceeded expectation for me as a 4th round rookie. I don't know why I think people are making it seem like Mason McCormick played much better than I thought he did. Like, I don't know if I'm lower on his play than a lot of people are, but I didn't see a guy that should be guaranteed a starting job going into 2025. And I wonder if that's maybe a position that's being slept on in terms of where they could add. James Daniels, I presume that he's going to walk. We also don't know what's going on with Isaac Seumalo. It wouldn't shock me if Isaac Seumalo announced his retirement tomorrow. Like he just like I think what's going to happen is he'll play out the last year of his contract and then probably call it quits. But anybody that's spent any time around Isaac. Very reserved dude. When he does talk, it means something. But he just doesn't have the vibe to me like a guy that's going to play, a super long career. So I think like interior offensive line, one of those guard spots hasn't been talked about enough as a potential draft pick or free agent add as well. If they want to go the vet route, just to give insurance in case McCormick doesn't take another step in the off season. Defensively, corner, you got to do something there. I know that there's interest from both sides in a Dante Jackson reunion, continuing that marriage. I don't know that I share that sentiment. I would be fine with him back on the roster, but my fear is that they would bring him back and feel like that's a box checked as CB2. And if it's in it, even from a depth purpose, I had this conversation with Tyler, my co-host on Around the 412. But even if you talk about from a depth purpose, the one thing that I really don't like about that is then I feel like you're really starting to bury Corey Trice. Where like you're not giving him a shot to carve out any role. And while he's undergone the injuries and everything like that, I just think the dude's too talented that just continue to push down the depth chart for a 30-year-old or whatever, however old Dante Jackson
could be 31 next year, right?
Okay, yeah, will be next year. Yeah. So that's where I'm at with that. And then the one that I just haven't brought up yet, because to me it's the glaring hole, is the defensive line. And while wide receiver is the glaring hole on the offense, I think defensive line, when I'm looking at just like the long-term outlook, you got Keanu Benton as a future piece, and then what? I mean, Cam Hayward. The last time you and I talked, we were 2 of maybe 10 people that I was ever seeing on my timeline talking about Cam Hayward in a positive way. And then he went on to have the season that he had. But how many more of those does he have in the tank? I don't want to doubt Cam Hayward, but he's getting up there in years, and they don't have a succession plan right now. Larry Ogunjobi, I mentioned as a cut candidate. That defensive line needs help. I think giving up 300 yards to the Ravens, if they didn't already feel like defensive line was at the top of the board for them, they do now. And I think that shows with how much attention they were paying to that position group at the Senior Bowl.
I agree with you. And I'm going to kind of work through some of the talking points you brought up there. So one of the things I want to bring up, because Colin's not here, he intended to be here with us, but on Tuesday, he said he would go after Trey Smith and just give him the bag. Basically, whatever he wants, pay him top dollar to be a guard here. Bring him in. I do think asking a guy like Mason McCormick to run it back as a starter, as a 4th round guy, is a tall task. It was a big leap for him coming into this season as a rookie to begin with, and then being thrust into action was quite premature, in my opinion. I mean, between him and Spencer Anderson, I agreed with playing him. They were close. Go with the guy who was a higher pick, who you feel like has more potential to grow, has a higher ceiling. So I understood what they did at the time. But having said that, do you want to run that back? You know what I mean? Like, where's, and then also, even if you don't want to look at it, if you do want to walk into this season with him as a starter, what's the depth on this team? I mean, like you said, if Sam Mully walks next year, are you drafting high next year at guard? Are you like going to try to get a guy this year and develop? Are you bringing in a vet? That's going to be kind of a big ask. That I agree. Nobody's really talking about that right now. Kind of flying under the radar. And you brought up Dante Jackson. There's no part of me that wants him back. I feel like a lot of the interceptions came in zone coverage where the ball was just wildly overthrown or wildly underthrown, and he was just there. It wasn't making plays on the ball most of the time. And he got torched by a tight end in Kansas City. It was not his best effort. And the injuries that piled up with him, I think, kind of got me because, we're not dressing Corey Trice because he's there, and then he's getting hurt, and he's not in the game half the time. And it's just like, it put us in a terrible position. So there's no part of me that wants him back personally. And Larry Ogunjobi, even though I thought he played better this year, he never lived up to that contract. So why would you keep him around for another go around? Like, I think defensive line you could easily make an argument is the biggest need on the team. And I'm only saying that because I think it's a foregone conclusion that Justin Fields is going to be the quarterback. The deal just hasn't been done yet. But I think it's going to get done. Personally, I don't have anybody inside the way that you and Alan talk to people, but like, it just seems like the tea leaves are there if you want to read them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, from everybody that I've talked to, I think that's the direction they want to go. But I think the money's going to have to be right. My prediction is it's Justin Fields, and I think based off everything that they said, they want it to be a multi-year deal. I don't think they want this to just be a 1-year contract, because I think they want to give themselves insurance in 26. Even if the plan is to take the big swing, you want to have a contingency plan in place on the roster, and it makes sense for that to be Justin Fields. I think that there's just, because here's the thing, like with Russ, and I said this on the podcast this past week. Every day runs together. It might have been 2 weeks ago. It might have been 3 weeks ago. There's a lot of things about the Steelers offense that I feel like, if isolated, and what I mean is in a different situation, not necessarily just isolated, but in a different situation that wasn't here, could have maybe worked. I think Russell Wilson can still give you average quarterback play. I think Arthur Smith can be a good offensive coordinator. I think you can get by with the lack of playmakers if you have an elite quarterback or an elite offensive coordinator. And I think you can get by with the offensive line the Steelers had if you have a QB that can make do with it, or an offensive coordinator that can scheme around the poor offensive line play. But all together in succession, like the Steelers had this year, that ain't going to work. And I think that's right. The biggest reason to not run it back with Russell Wilson, to me, is because you saw what that was capped at. And I don't think there's interest in them doing it again. Now, there's like people talking about, they've started contract negotiations, or they're talking or whatever. They're going to have those conversations regardless, because what if Russ is like, I'll come back for $5 million. Like, okay, well then, that's a different conversation. But
absolutely, you
gotta, of course, have that conversation. That does not mean that they're like close on him coming back, or that's the preferred option, because based off the conversations that I've had, I think quite the opposite.
Yeah, I can imagine. I just don't think, first of all, I think he's going to Pete Carroll. I think that reunion's probably going to happen, especially when there's reports out there from, who was it, Ian Rappaport maybe, that said that he's trying to get the gang back together.
Yeah, offensive coordinator as well, potentially. Yeah. So, I mean, it all makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, and honestly, for Russ's sake, I kind of feel like, I don't know if the they're a better situation than we are necessarily, but I think that it makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, depending on what they do in terms of adding other playmakers this offseason, you had a pretty darn good start with Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, in my opinion. So,
yeah, for sure.
Stuff to work with there. And I know people will think, oh, Brock Bowers, tight end, Russ doesn't throw to the middle of the field, but Brock Bowers, the way that they line him up, like even if he doesn't target the middle of the field, Brock Bowers is still going to get his. And
yeah, he can do absolutely anything.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing you mentioned there that I wanted to touch on was the Trey Smith thing, because I don't want to say that I'm not on board. I'm not going to shoot that down or anything like that. But I look at what his market is going to be. Like I was reading, Jeremy Fowler put out his top 50 free agents article on ESPN, and it was like within there's some predictions and stuff like that. And you get to Trey Smith, who's listed as the number 2 overall player heading into free agency, and it says a lot of teams view him as the number 1 player heading into free agency, and especially with the way guards are starting to get paid, wouldn't be surprised if he's in like 25 million per year range as a guard. And okay, so now you're talking about, do you pay a guard as opposed to a top flight receiver? Like if you have that money to spend and you're choosing Trey Smith over T. Higgins, is that the best route to go?
I still don't know. So if let's say T came in at 35, you'd be eating $60 million up between those two per season. That's a big chunk. And then we talk about, so I mentioned at the beginning of this, we got 40 million right now. You not only are going to need to open up some cap space, you have to open up the whole cap space. Restructuring TJ's contract would be an absolute must in that scenario. You could open up some other ones, restructure even the deal Muth just did, or other Minka Fitzpatrick, things like that, to try to open up some more cap space. Because the things I've seen, we can get up to possibly $90 million, but then that leaves you $30 million to fill some other holes. So then how do you want to eat into all of that?
Yeah, no,
I don't think so.
You're choosing one or the other if you're going that route. TJ's cap number for next year, once they extend him, assuming that that's going to happen, they could get that down to like 10 million for year 1, probably. But then you look at, okay, beyond that though, with the cap, so they could be in a really nice cap situation for this year, but just depending on how things are structured, it could turn out to not be so pretty, in 27, especially when you don't have the QB thing figured out. If you hit on the guy in the draft, that's obviously a very attractive contract to have for a franchise quarterback on a rookie deal. But when that guy's not in place right now, it's hard to justify that type of spending without knowing what's in place at that position. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. So what about, like, if you were going to fill that second corner spot, you sound like you're pretty high on Corey Trace. Are you giving Corey Trace a chance to start this year? Do you want to draft a guy? Do you want to bring in a veteran maybe? Like what would you do at the second cornerback position right now?
That is a spot where I also look at free agency. And again, you're talking about competing within the top guys that are going to be hitting this free agency class. I look at DJ Reed, who's spent time with the Jets, used to be in Seattle. And to me, he's the top corner that's hitting the free agent market. I love his game. I think he's kind of flown under the radar since Sauce Gardner's got there, because he takes a lot of the fanfare and everything like that. But like from a down-to-down consistency perspective, I think the argument's there that he's been the better of the 2 corners in his time with the Jets. You got Carlton Davis, you got Travarius Ward. Travarius Ward's interesting too, kind of an unsung hero on the back end for the Niners and what he's did. Sounds like there's like no shot at him going back to San Fran, and it's not even like football related, just very tragic, losing a child. Right. He just said it's hard for him to still be in that same space. So he's not going to go back to San Fran. If he would be open to Pittsburgh, I think that would be a great place. Byron Murphy, after a breakout year with the Vikings, is hitting free agency. Might be overpaying a little bit there because of the production that he just had last year. But then it gets kind of bleak, to be honest with you, unless you want to throw a dart at a Christian Fulton, who was with the Chargers last year after it didn't work out with the Titans, who maybe still has some interesting traits about him. Asante Samuel Jr. hitting free agency. Yeah, I mean, after that top group, honestly, I think then you probably get into the draft. But I'll be honest, to me, not the best draft class for corners. Like you talked about receivers, and I absolutely agree with you on the receivers, by the way. I was talking about this with Alan. It's like I have a hard time finding more than like two guys that I would put into like a top 10 of a really strong class like we've seen in years past. So yeah.
I think Carlton Davis is the guy that I would really like to take a look at in free agency. DJ Reed is another guy. Ward, he's another guy who's kind of on the wrong side of 30. If you were going to bring him, I think you're going to probably bring him in for a short-term deal. I probably wouldn't do anything long-term with him. I think did he just turn 30 this year? Maybe, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't have it up in front of me.
He'll turn 30 before next season starts, but he's still 29 right now.
Okay. I knew it was somewhere in there. I like the idea at cornerback of bringing a veteran in and just letting Corey Trice compete with that veteran. I don't want to run it back with Dante Jackson because I think that the shortcomings are evident, and I think the injuries were pretty crippling to our defense because once he went out, James Pierre was coming in, and I really just disliked James Pierre outside of being a gunner. And one of the things I actually did listen to the 412 podcast that you guys were doing, and I love the idea that we get away from the specialists. We have too many guys on the team that are just absolute, special teams specialists, and then you get them in the field, and you're like, oh crap, you know what I mean? Like Killebrew, you keep that guy around. He's the heart and the soul of the special teams unit. But
I think we have too many. Was my point.
Yeah, we definitely had too many. So I agreed with what you guys were going with that. Let me ask you this, because I have one that I kind of feel like is an under the radar, another thing that's not really being talked about. I personally think that we need another tight end. Darnell Washington's very limited in what he does. I love the little dump passes where he just gets to go with his 300 pounds and truck a small corner. That gives me great satisfaction to watch. But outside of that, I mean, what value does he bring as a receiver? I would love to, add to that room. So Pat is not the only guy who's a pass catcher in that group. What do you think about that?
I mean, we had a conversation about maybe an outside the box thing that they could do, like basically a similar conversation with the guards that we just talked about a little bit ago. I think tight end could fall into that same bucket if you're not bringing Michael Pruitt back. And I don't know why Connor Hayward would be guaranteed a roster spot heading into next year. And if you're talking about Darnell Washington, I think that, again, it goes back to how I feel like Steelers fans maybe over evaluating what a player is capable of. Darnell Washington's a great blocker. I think, like you said, when you can get him out in space on those bootlegs, it's pretty fun to watch him get the ball in his hands and do his thing. But he's not, going to run an expansive route tree. He's not a guy that in between the 20s is going to offer you a whole lot. I think that where the one gripe could be is within the red zone, the lack of utilization. Like, I think that's you saw in Denver when he scored that touchdown, his only touchdown, like what he can do in certain spots of the field. And I think that's where you should utilize him more. But I agree, because when you're playing 12, 13 personnel and only one of your tight ends offers anything as a pass catcher, it makes you pretty limited. So I agree that I would go and look for another, even if it's whether it's the draft or free agency, like even if that guy really offers nothing as a blocker and isn't going to play a ton of snaps, just like a pass catching specialist type of tight end. I don't know that I want to dump. Let me give you the type of player that I'm talking about. I'm not advocating for this specific player, but if they brought in like a Mike Gesicki ilk as another tight end.
That's who I was going to mention.
Yeah.
Right. So of the free agents, he's the only guy I would look at myself personally. The rest of the good guys you could probably get that type of player anywhere in the draft.
Because the one that I was just saying was a Jawan Johnson, right? Obviously has a ton of production as a pass catcher, also a Penn State guy, and I know Pat would be on board with it. But yeah, when I look at the other free agents, I don't see it. From any perspective to be, unless
Tyler Conklin's like the only other guy who's kind of like experienced in both blocking and receiving in this past.
Down the board here. And this guy's surprisingly already over 30, but began his NFL career late because he had spent time on a practice squad. Steelers should be familiar with him. Tanner Hudson of the Bengals.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I'm not advocating for him, but I know that there's obviously some familiarity with the Steelers playing against him, and at times has made some plays against them.
So I told you and Colin I had an idea that I kind of wanted to throw out there, and I was going to justify once me and you got on here today. And I think this team needs playmakers, and we do run a ton of 12 and 13 personnel. If Emeka Ibuka, probably Matthew Golden are not there. I don't even care if Luther Burden is there. I would look at Tyler Warren. I would look at Colston Loveland because they're playmaking tight ends. And Loveland actually can block too. Now, Warren's not known as much as a blocker. I thought he had a really nice playoff run blocking and receiving. But adding another playmaker, if the receiver you want is not there in round one, the defensive line draft is super deep. And you're going to find your guy. You can find one in the second round. I feel like you can find one in the third round. If you look at nose tackle, if we want to move Benton down to the 3 technique like I want to do, you can find a nose tackle down in the 4th round that's a quality guy that could be a starter. I would not shy away from drafting a tight end early, even if it's in the 1st round. What are your thoughts as far as that?
Well, I think the reason that I'm not going to push back on it immediately is because, like you said, it's another pass catcher. At the end of the day, that's what they need. Whether it comes at the receiver spot or the tight end spot, if they get talented pass catchers, sign me up, because that's ultimately what they need. Tyler Warren, to me, and Colston Loveland, to be honest, like 2 of the better, just if you talk like eligibles within this draft class, like throw away the position title that you're going to attach to them. I know that Harold Fannin Jr. gotten a ton of talk. The routes look pretty clunky to me, at least what I've seen.
Yeah.
I know the production has been great, but I like this draft class a lot, to be honest with you, at the tight end spot. Oronde Gadsden, the second out of Syracuse, is a really nice player. Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, to me, is a really nice player. Jake Birmingham out of Clemson is a nice player. So I think there's tight ends that are going to be there in the middle rounds too, but certainly not at the caliber of like a Tyler Warren or a Colston Loveland. Like if that's, you're shooting for the stars, you're basically saying to everybody, saying to the league, yeah, we're going to play 12 personnel like every snap. But I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah. If it works, and that's kind of the offense that Arthur Smith likes anyway. Why not add another playmaker from that position so that it's not like, okay, well, Darnell Washington comes off the field. We bring a slot receiver. We're definitely throwing this time, or we bring George Pickens on the field. We're definitely throwing this time. If they want to keep George off the field, that gives you another playmaker from that same formation where it's not an obvious running situation. And I think it takes some of the tendencies off the table. And if Warren, what did we have trouble with last year? Short yardage. Who is very good at the tush push at Penn State? Tyler Warren. He ran it quite a bit, right? Let's get a first down once in a while, come on.
Let me throw this out there. Actually, by the way, Tanner Hudson was like the QB sneak guy for Cincinnati. But Colston Loveland is actually got my mind going about the tight end thing, because I don't know that we see a second contract for Darnell Washington. So I think it would make more sense to add the guy with more blocking chops. If it's like, if you're like very close on them, right? Like if you're flipping a coin basically between Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, I probably lean that direction, just because, like you said, the blocking chops that he at least brings to the table as well.
Yeah, he's a fantastic player. A lot of people are going to kind of forget about him because he didn't play. He was injured a lot of this year, but he's going to be probably drafted pretty highly, I think. So
as Big Ten fans, we
certainly
know about Colston Loveland.
Hate that dude, but love him in this draft. So, which of the needs do you feel like are best served through the draft? So we talked about a couple of positions that you will want to see filled through free agency. So what are some of the ones you want to see filled through the draft?
I think there's some crossover. Like wide receiver to me is one that I would do both. Like I think I would double dip at the wide receiver spot. Defensive tackle though is like easily draft as opposed to free agency for me. Not only because I think how deep the group is, along with just how thin it is in the free agent market as well. And just, man, when you're talking about 20 plus guys, 4+ guys that are probably first rounders, another dozen or so that should go on day 2, that to me just screams like that should be the path to go, getting them on a rookie contract. Running back is also easy draft to me as opposed to free agency. Jim Nagy, I don't think he over exaggerated this. Like 30 backs from this draft class are draftable guys. Man, like Bishal Tootin out of Virginia Tech is not the best back in this class. He's my favorite for the Steelers specifically. The outside zone concepts that they run at Virginia Tech, and Steelers fans will love it. The amount of times that they get this guy the ball off like screens, tosses, pitch. Like he's an Arthur Smith back, but he's very good at doing the things that Arthur Smith wants him to do. Which again, going back to like the batch that we had, Najee and Jalen Warren, maybe not the greatest scheme fits. I still think that there's a spot for Jalen Warren and he'll be back. But
sure,
I think that they need to add it back on day 2 at the very latest, round 4. Bishal Tootin would fit in nicely there. I mean, there's obviously like Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State's a day 2 back probably. I know that they love him. I think that he can make a ton of sense. And honestly, we're saying 30 plus draftable running backs. That's with both Penn State guys going back to school. Because if they would have been coming out, the Steelers would have been very interested in those guys too.
Yeah, I was shocked by that. Actually, by the way, I thought at least one of them were coming out. I mean, to run both of them back, that was pretty crazy. I agree with everything you're saying. I think the running back position makes a ton of sense. Defensive line makes a ton of sense. And I said yesterday when I kind of did a solo show, it wouldn't surprise me if they went defensive line twice in this draft, and it may not even surprise me if they go defensive line twice in the top 4 picks, depending on how free agency falls. If they fill a number of positions where need isn't like there, like, yeah. I think that's something it's such a deep draft for that position. If they want to go like a defensive tackle early, and then maybe the nose tackle, like the big run stuffing defensive or nose tackle later in the draft, that wouldn't surprise me either. But I just really feel like Benton needs to move out of that nose tackle spot personally. So it might be why I'm thinking that way.
I think they want him to, like I'm saying, with that Larry cut, assuming that happens, they'll move him over into that spot. I mean, there's a ton of talent even at the senior. Like, there's guys that aren't the Senior Bowl, like Mason Graham, who's gonna go top 5, top 7 picks. But Walter Nolan was down there, great player. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham's running mate in Michigan, was down there. TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, fantastic player. Derek Harmon was down there. Mike Green is an edge, but man, like, he might have had the most fun clips from the week that I saw. Unbelievable. We Are Marshall, just a fantastic week for him. And then he didn't do anything today. He didn't need to. Like, I think that he just put his stamp on.
He left, didn't he? Did he leave today? Like, was he not there? I thought I read that somewhere he left.
Yeah.
After he ran that
work and met with some teams, and he was just like, yeah, I'll call it, because I think it was Daniel Jeremiah just put something out, and it was like, yeah, the Eagles love this guy, could take him in the first round. And if he's getting like the first round buzz now, like, that he did what he needed to do this week.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you have any any certain way, like, if you were to structure this draft out, if you were kind of Omar Khan in this situation, do you have a positional like choice by round? Do you want to go simply by need? Do you want to go by best available? Like, how are you looking at this draft this year? Because I think we've done it a couple of different ways.
I think you get in trouble if you're not just taking the best available player. And I think that that's why Howie Roseman is the best GM in football. And he has been, should probably be executive of the year for like 5 straight years with what he's done in Philly. Just like, people fall to them and they just take them. Like, it's not, you stop the slide every single time. Nobody's questioning, are they getting past Philly? Because they're not. Whether it's Jalen Carter, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon, it's just like ridiculous what he does with that team. So I think that it's always going to be just take the best player available and make it work. Now, with that being said, if the best available player doesn't match what your football team needs at all, okay, then maybe it's a different conversation. Like, if the best available player in every single round is a running back, don't take 7 running backs.
Right.
That being said, I keep telling Alan, I think the best case scenario as we sit 3 months out of the draft right now is Emeka Egbuka is available to the Steelers at 21. I think that he fits everything that they want, and not just as a player. I think that he's the type of person that they want to bring into that room as well. I think there's nothing more telling about the type of player that he is than he's been completely okay being never more than the number 2 option within the Ohio State passing offense, having to play with Marvin Harrison Jr. across from him and then Jeremiah Smith across from him. And it's almost like he's their Chris Olave now. Like we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba go through this. Terry McLaurin was never the highly talked about guy at Ohio State. Those guys still show up on Sundays in the NFL and play. And I think that, you look at the clip where he's talking about, hey, Will Howard, this is what we need to do. You're going to see Jeremiah Smith on this play here because of this guy giving inside leverage. And just the way that he sees the game, how unselfish he is, I think they're going to fall in love with him. I think they already have fallen in love with him. There's a lot of guys on that Ohio State team, Tyleek Williams, that they've scouted a ton, Quinshon Judkins, who I mentioned. If I were saying my ideal way that this goes, it's probably Ibuka at 21, and then I can't give you like exact players because I don't know who's going to be available beyond that. Obviously,
right.
A D tackle in the second round, probably the running back in the third. And then at that point, then it really becomes about just like whoever the best player is there. Because I think you can make the case for anything. Like if you get one of those corners that we talked about in free agency, whether it's Carlton Davis, DJ Reed, I think, you can still probably make the case for adding a corner there in those middle rounds. Maybe that's a tight end. Like if Arroyo is still there out of Miami, could make a ton of sense. But yeah, those would be ideally, I think, the way that the first 3 rounds go for this team.
Yeah, I think Ibuka's. So first of all, I think there's so much misunderstood about Emeka Ibuka. Everybody talks about him as just a slot receiver. That dude moves around everywhere on that Ohio State offense. I'm telling you, I see so many people. Like, we don't need another slot. We don't need another slot. He has played all over the field, and he is efficient at every position that he steps up to. And he's a tremendous blocker. I mean, he's a tremendous blocker for a wide receiver.
Like he's small. He's not small. He's like 6'1", 200 something, right? So like,
yes.
I don't know why people are trying to pigeonhole him.
But the thing that I think that is people. So I think he's 6'1". I think he was listed at 6'1", 205. I don't know. Yeah. He's obviously not at like the Senior Bowl or anything where he's getting weighed in right now. So I'd be interested to. Yeah, I'll be interested to see what he actually weighs in at the combine. But the dude runs like a 4.38. I mean, he's got speed too. He's a burner. He's just a kind of character type guy that you want in the organization. As you said, he's so selfless. And when we've seen so many drama queens come through the Pittsburgh receiver room as of late, like it'd be nice to get a guy who just wants to bring the lunch pail to work and do his job. You know what I mean? So I think he'd be a perfect addition. Wide receiver wise, if there was a guy in the second round, I know Trey Harris's name gets thrown out a lot. I really like Jaden Higgins. I really, really like Jaden Higgins from Iowa State.
Yeah, there's 3 guys that I would say, if you were to say, Steelers are going to land one on day 2, who do you hope it's going to be? It's the guys that you just mentioned there. It's Higgins and Trey Harris. I'm curious about Trey Harris though, because there's some boards have him as like wide receiver 4 above the Texas guys and stuff like that. I mean, the potential's there. Like if you're looking for a 1-to-1 George Pickens type, he's probably that guy in terms of the type of receiver that he is. But the other one that I'll throw in there, the names that you mentioned, is Jalen Royals out of Utah State, who's also at the Senior Bowl. I'm gonna very early in the process here. I'm telling you right now, I have a hard time saying he's not going to be my top 5 of the class, which I think also speaks to it not being the best draft class. But the dude's super impressive. Only 2 years at Utah State. He was a transfer, but dude, like the acrobatic catches, just the raw athlete that he is. Looks like he's finally healthy. Deep threat capability. He runs a 4.38 as well. And yeah, just like getting him on a vertical plane, having him do those second and third level routes. I think he would fit in really well with what Art wants to do. So
yeah,
those are the 3 guys for me.
I definitely agree with you. I think the wide receiver D line are probably going to be picks 1 and 2 in this draft. The way things are kind of following it at the moment. Again, we're way out on this, so things can obviously change. But of the D-line group, who are some of the guys that you like? Because I've got a list of guys that so far I like. I'm pretty early in the process of like my evaluation, but I've kind of built out like a list of guys that I like so far. Who are some of the names that stand out to you?
I mean, I mentioned the guys at the Senior Bowl, like Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant. They're 2 of my favorites. TJ Sanders, to me, like his like projection kind of all over the place. I think he could be a late first rounder. Like, I'm not even sure that, because people were like, oh, could that be the Steelers' second round pick? If he gets to the Steelers in the second round, I'll be pretty surprised based on just very early in the draft process here. Going a little bit further down. I mean, I love Tyleek, obviously.
Tyleek's a beast.
The one that's intriguing to me, but like, do I trust? Steelers got to bring back Carl Dunbar, by the way, if his contract is up. They got to get him back in the fold because that ain't the coach that you want to be moving on from if you're trying to turn over some coaches.
He wasn't the changes we were talking about, huh?
The one that's interesting to me is Deion Walker out of Kentucky because he's just so mad. Like he has the things that you can't teach, but like very concerning the pad level that he plays at. Like there's some really bad tape. But at the same time, just again, there's things about him that you can't teach somebody to do. I wonder if he's almost like a moldable ball clay. Like I think a lot of the stuff where he struggles is correctable. So I'd be interested in a player like him.
He reminds me a lot of like a lower level Jordan Davis. Like he reminds me a lot of like a lower level Jordan Davis. That's kind of like my comp, so to speak, for Deion Walker. Like I think that dude, he can be an absolute game wrecker if he has the motor going all the time. But I agree. I've heard a ton of people talk about his pad level and stuff too, but those are teachable, right? So like you think that could come around and be fixed. And also him being a nose tackle, we don't run base all the time. So you don't need that guy on the field, for 40 and 50 plays. You're probably going to need him for 25 plays maybe. And, it's going to be as of right now, it'd be Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton on the field all the time. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at him. I would take him as
one more at you. I actually don't even know how to pronounce his first name. Ioannis Peebles.
Oh, Peebles, yeah.
Dude, he's small. 6'1", 290, and I think that's being generous based off how he looks. He looks pretty light. But like just the way that he plays, I'm not calling him this player, but like Alan said this name to me, and then I couldn't stop seeing it when I would watch him. It's like watching like a lightest version of Aaron Donald, like a Wayfair version of Aaron Donald.
Wayfair.
Aaron Donald. I don't think he's like an every down guy either. He's probably a rotational interior defensive lineman. But like, and I don't know what he's going to offer. And this is where I struggle to see the fit specifically for the Steelers, but just in terms of I like the player, I think he's probably going to be more of like a pass down guy as opposed to, a run down guy. I don't know how well he's going to hold up. But yeah, look at the defensive line group. Those are the guys that intrigue me. But again, Peebles probably not a fit for the Steelers. There's so much talent within this group, though. Like I'm looking at a list right now that I have just pulled up, and I'm down like to the 35th guy, and I'm like, yeah, this guy could. There's some intrigue still there, so it's a good
for sure. Yeah, I mean Kenneth Grant's on my list also. Another guy that went to the wrong school, but he's a tremendous player. Tyleek, obviously, Deion Walker. I mean, those kind of like are the top three nose tackles for me right now. Walter Nolan, even though I'm not sure that he's going to be anywhere near 20 by the time this is all said and done, I think he's going to go higher.
His teammate's pretty good too. Like if you watch Walter Nolan, JJ, I think his last name is pronounced Pegas.
Yes, yeah, I've seen him popping up on some of these videos too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's somebody I think that's the best spot to draft a wide receiver because I agree. I mean, if it's not round one, I think there's a bit of a drop off as far as like ready-made guys in the second round. I really like we talked about, Trey Harris and Jaden Higgins. I like both those guys, but are they at the level of an Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden? I think there's a small drop off there, and then once you get past the second round, I think it's like you better hit somebody on free agency.
And
that's just my thoughts.
Steelers is two of like the top, and this depends on what the team's board looks like, but two of the top 6-ish prospects at that position are guys that just they don't fit what they're looking for because you already have Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson on the roster. Like,
right.
I'm not saying that they're bad players, but how do you justify a Luther Burden or Isaiah Bond within this offense at 5'11", 180 pounds?
Yeah.
I don't know that the fit's there. So that also is more.
Same with the Miami kid.
Early. Yeah, Restrepo. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Restrepo. I mean, he's another really he's like 165 or 170 pounds or something. Maybe like you can't add a whole room full of guys that are like that built that way. You have to have somebody with a different body type. That's why I like
out of Oregon can't be on the board. Like
no, and I really like him. I mean, I really like him, but at 150 pounds, like do you like him and Calvin Austin might have a foot race that's pretty intriguing, but like if either one of them get hit, you just hold your breath to see if they get back up. Like that's kind of what those guys are like.
We already have a couple.
Yeah. So, I mean, any other positions in the draft? You mentioned running back a good bit. There's a ton of names. You could talk me into drafting a running back in the 6th round. You could talk me into drafting a running back in the 3rd round. Like I'm fine with wherever they draft a running back because I think there's just a ton of talent in that room. Like any positions that intrigue you right now?
Well, I mean, while we're on running backs, I only mentioned one name, but there's like Devin Neal out of Kansas would be a great fit for them as well. The one that I know people keep pushing is Ollie Gordon. I don't see it. He put on like 10, 12 pounds last year. And I don't know. I think we'd have a lot of the same complaints about him as we did with Najee. So I don't know that would be a path to go.
Yeah.
Marcus Yarns is also very interesting. Talked about Judkins already. Brashard Smith out of SMU, super great burst. Other positions though.
Well, here, since if we're going to go down the list of some running backs, Caleb Johnson's a guy I really like out of Iowa. I think he's a big name. Here's going to be the under the radar guy for me. The under the radar guy for me, who's not going to be talked about. I don't know the exact fit, but I know the team runs a lot of zone. Khalil Mullings, another dang Michigan guy, but that dude at 235 pounds, he's got some burst. He can pull away from some guys. He's got a ton of power. He doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires because he was a converted linebacker. If you were going to draft a guy like ultra late in this draft and you want a guy that's going to be a complement to Jaylen Warren and not necessarily like the same type of runner, I think he could make a ton of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think there's probably 30 plus guys that you can make a case for in this draft. Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn, I think, is another guy. I'm curious to see what he runs because he's got blazing speed too. I'd guess in the low.
That's Colin's dude. Colin is pounding the drum for him right now. He is absolutely pounding the drum for him. He loves Hunter. He's been talking about Hunter for like 2 weeks now.
I guess I just assumed. Oh wait, no, isn't he just Kansas basketball? Like it's not. He doesn't
he's just Kansas basketball. He's an Irish boy for football, so we gave him a little smack talk after the championship game. But any other position groupings outside of the obvious couple that are like super deep, but that you're kind of intrigued by?
Well, you know what, like Wyatt Millham out of West Virginia. I gave him a lot of credit this week. He moved into guard after never playing guard from his tackle spot. West Virginia boy. I think it could be pretty interesting if they were going to spend a pick on a guard, put him back to next to Zach Frazier, and have those guys for like a decade plus on the interior of the offensive line. That would be interesting. I'm just trying to think of some other offensive line guys because we haven't spent really much time talking about them, which is fair because I don't know. Like same thing with linebacker, right? Like it probably doesn't make sense to even like spend much time talking about that spot because they're not going to do it.
It's the only spot so far that the offensive line, safety and edge are kind of the ones that I really haven't made it to really develop a list. So we can go ahead and do this one right now since you got this question right here. So do you think it's better for the team to keep GP or try to get a 2nd round pick, a ton of talent, but what a headache? Totally agree with him. What would you do?
I don't think you're going to get a 2nd round pick, but I don't see a path forward where George Pickens is on the roster this year, regardless of if the team wants him to be or not, because I see 2 scenarios here. Neither of them end up with him getting a contract extension this offseason. So whether it's the team wanting to move on before we get to that point, or we get to that point, they tell him that he's not getting a contract extension, and then he forces his way out because he's not getting a contract extension. One way or another, I just don't see a path forward where George Pickens continues to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's just whether it's on his accord or their accord that kind of forced that relationship to end. But I also don't see a 2nd round pick happening. I think probably a 3rd round pick is the best that they're going to do. And that's kind of where I've been at with it. It wouldn't surprise me if it's even like a low third, early fourth. Like, I don't. You're talking about 1 year of George Pickens where you need to give him a contract after this, and it's not necessarily a secret. The actions, like,
Yeah,
I think everybody knows what they're getting with George
it's pretty
Pickens.
public.
So, yeah,
I
I just don't see anybody coughing that up.
I've been long saying George Pickens will not be here this year. And I've had people fighting with me, of course, on social media, telling me I'm crazy and like, all kind of crazy stuff that they've been talking about on there. But like, I've been saying since probably before the Philly game, like that George Pickens was not going to be on the roster next year. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I stand by it today. I really just think, and if we're going to get a second round pick, I think the only way we're getting a second round pick, it's not going to be in 2025. It would be in 2026 because you would have to hold him until after the draft and wait for somebody who did not hit on their receiver in the draft and they want to go make an upgrade because they feel like they can make a run. That'd be the only way I could see us getting a second round pick. It's just like we're sitting here talking. It's a pretty steep drop off. And if you want to give up a second, if you're a contending team to go get a talent like George Pickens and you feel like you can kind of rein him in a bit, best of luck to you, and we'll gladly take that second for 2026.
Well, that I think every team is going to think they're going to be the team that can get through to him. Like, right? A talent like that is going to get second and probably even a third chance somewhere. But I don't see it being for a 2. Like, and if you're talking about pushing that back to 2026, I'm not saying it takes it off the table for me, but like.
What's the value for the Steelers, though?
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Like, I understand that from the outside looking in, we might not view this as a team that's going to compete for all that much in 2025, and it is more about 2026. But how do they view it? Like, are they
right?
Was just saying, yeah, maybe they would because if 2026 is where they're going to take a shot at the quarterback spot, they want that extra
acquire picks.
So
yeah,
I don't know how they view it.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenging one. It's going to be interesting to watch it unfold. He reminds me so much of Terrell Owens. Just like tremendous talent. He can put the production up on the field, but like the extracurriculars, man, he's just like a cancer in the locker room. He's. I'm sure things that you probably can't say that Pat. If he's ever talked to you about, Alan probably knows some things from being in the locker room every day that he couldn't talk about. But like, you don't have to be an insider to understand what he's going to be doing to that locker room. It's incredible to me, the things that he's done. So I don't know. It's kind of crazy situation. It'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. And that's why, again, going back to something we talked about earlier, being aggressive, I'd definitely be ultra aggressive in the wide receiver, and I would still draft a receiver just because of the unknown with George Pickens.
Yeah. Right. Like, the last thing that I see, like, it's not even on the table, an extension this summer. And I don't know how he's going to react to that. Like, even if they wanted to use him as their own rental and have him play for them in 2025, I don't know how he reacts to not getting extension this summer.
Especially if you imagine getting T. Higgins paying him and then George Pickens doesn't get paid. Well, yeah. Oh man, that's right. Oh man, that just has disaster written all over it. I don't know. Let me throw one more name. We're pushing up against an hour here, and I don't know how much time you've got, but let me throw another name out at you that could be like a later round pick, could be an upgrade. Because I think another thing that people aren't going to talk about, DeMonte Casey is probably not going to be back. You're going to need some depth at safety. What's Ryan Watt's recovery look like? He's more of the Deshaun Elliott backup, not the Minka Fitzpatrick backup. So, like, who would you throw in that 3 safety package? Who also could play down in the slot and get Minka out of there? What do you think about Jordan Hancock out of Ohio State? Can play both sides.
Yeah, I was wondering if that's where you were going with it. Sign me up. Again, not a position that I've looked a ton into is the safeties, just because, like you're saying, if they're adding one, it's probably a third one. Should probably look into it more now after the Ryan Watts stuff, because I actually just talked to Ryan the other day. I reached out to him just to wish him a speedy recovery and make sure he was in a good mental space after the surgery and stuff like that. We had a brief conversation, and I'll be honest, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of him being able to resume his football career, which is pretty sad for for him. But
Yeah, man.
you got to turn the page, obviously, as a football team and start looking past that and seeing about, because like you said, I don't know about the Monte KZ. He's 31 himself. So
Yeah.
to see what direction they go in that perspective. I like that name. I mean, again, I don't know how early they're going to draft. I think everybody in the world probably likes Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame.
Oh yeah,
that one happening.
You're talking first or second round pick. Yeah, we're not going that far. I hope not. At least we're in trouble with the rest of the draft.
Right. I'll be honest. Interesting, and this is like day 3 you're talking about, but the pick got a good look at him this year. Maxon Hook, the safety out of Toledo, he's down at the Senior Bowl playing as well. I think he would potentially be an interesting guy on day 3. Again, like somewhat local, right? With West Virginia, Aubrey Burks is a safety out of there, 5'11", 210 pounds. Kind of fits as a third safety. Yeah, I'm just trying to look at like where, because it's going to be a day 3 pick most likely, so I'm kind of looking within that range.
Sure.
Kamari Wilson out of Arizona State. He's 6 foot 205. Be interested to see what he runs, because that's not really his thing, but I guess it depends. You're talking about if you're replacing a KZ, are you looking and you're not sure about Ryan Watts? Are you going more so the thumper type, or are you looking for more of the athlete?
I think I'm thinking more of the athlete, the guy who could step on the field with Minka Fitzpatrick, with also Deshaun Elliott, who can run that 3 safety package. If they're going to continue to do that, that's kind of why I brought up Hancock, because he's played in the slot so much in his career. He obviously played safety more, especially the back end of this Ohio State championship run. And so I think a guy like him is very intriguing for me, because he can kind of do all of those things that would fit into that package. Also, if you had to bring 2 safeties on the field, where Elliott's hurt again, and you're going to go with more 2 athletic guys instead of bringing a thumper in, then I think that takes Minka out of the box and keeps him into that deep safety look, and Hancock can kind of come down and play the box. Even though he's not the biggest guy, probably not going to be a big hitter in the run game, but like just trying to get Minka out of the box as much as possible is kind of where my mind was going with that.
Last name that I'll throw at you, because he's played 3 different spots on their defense. Achille Arnold out of USC. He's played both safety spots and also played within the nickel. So obviously, I think the Steelers could like that versatility. That'd be another one to look at on day 3.
Yeah. The last topic we really didn't get into, and talking about quarterbacks, earlier in the show. So, quarterback development. Do we need to hire a coach for quarterback development?
If you ask my mentions, no. If you ask me, yes. I think this is something that needs to take place now, and it's not, with the idea of what they could do for Justin Fields or whoever's here in 2025. It's more so about what they're doing for the next time that they throw that dart at the franchise guy in 2026 and wanting to have that guy in place. Listen, I have no clue if Tom Arth is that guy. All I was saying is he hasn't been. Mike Sullivan, who's not under contract anyway, but even if they brought him back, hasn't been. Arthur Smith hasn't been. Like, where's the guy that you are trusting to develop the quarterback? David Blau, who was a backup quarterback, just recently retired, spent 1 year on Washington's coaching staff, and is now getting elevated to a quarterback's coach. Whether he's got like 3 different teams that won him for that role. I'm not saying that's a specific name that we need to look at, but I think that's like the type of route that we need to go in terms of bringing somebody into the organization. I'm not saying as a QB coach, even like if you want Tom Arth to maintain that role, but this is where we talk about like expanding the coaching staff as an offensive assistant, so like a passing game coordinator.
Yeah.
Somebody that has been there and done that, or has been in that same role themselves as a former quarterback. Like, those are the types that attract me. And that's why I keep getting on the Steelers about the size of the staff more than anything else. It's not so much to me about, I think we need to have a conversation about the quality of coaches too, but the quantity is what gets me more than anything else, because there's no salary cap when it comes to the coaches. You can have as expensive and as many as you want. And I think the Steelers are really doing themselves a disservice by not having that guy.
Well, I think your point is so valid, just because of the fact that if I would assume that this team's going to win enough games to kind of never be inside that top 15 spot. We're always going to be in the 17 to 22 range if we just keep having the same seasons we've had for such a long time. There's 9-win, 10-win seasons. So you're going to trade up in 2026 to go get a quarterback, assuming that Justin Fields isn't the guy. Why in the world would you not just hire a coach to help develop that guy? I think that's just kind of a crazy notion. If you're putting that kind of an investment into your quarterback and hoping that guy's the quarterback of the future, you need to bring in as many tools as possible to help that guy develop into the quarterback of the future. It's a different game today than it was, when Ben Roethlisberger was coming out or Terry Bradshaw, or, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like today's game, you have to have some of these guys who can be specialists in that area, who can help these young guys develop and stay on track. And as a passing game coordinator, it's a title that you can get people to sign up for. It's not like it's just some piddly, like, nobody job. It's a quality job that's going to pay well, where you can, obviously make a name for yourself and get into a coordinator's position one day. So I think it makes a ton of sense personally.
The one guy, and he's just like, he's been hanging out. He's the guy that I talked about hiring an offensive coordinator instead of Matt Canada when they went that route, is Pep Hamilton, who, Andrew Luck gives a ton of credit for bringing him along. He was Justin Herbert's first quarterback coach when he got to the Chargers. I mean, even not that this is like some massive success, and they obviously went a different direction, but like the way that he had Davis Mills playing in Houston as a guy that had played 11 college games when Houston drafted him and then took him in the third round for whatever reason. I think Pep Hamilton's track record is the type that I would be looking to add to the staff, like a guy that has at least a couple names under his belt of a track record.
Yeah, interviewed with the Steelers at one point for the OC job, I believe, right? So a guy that they're already a little bit familiar with and a little bit on their radar to some degree. I actually really like Pep Hamilton. I don't know if you watched XFL, now UFL, but like when they're mic'd up on the sidelines, listening to him talking to the quarterbacks and stuff, man, he does a great job communicating. So I think he'd be a real nice addition. It's definitely a name to keep an eye on.
Right. Yeah. Or like, again, you could go that route, like the more veteran guy. But I'd also be interested in like this whole, like, again, not just using this name because it's the most recent example, this like David Blau path where he just retired on Washington's staff the year after retiring, and now he's going to be a quarterbacks coach. Who's the guy that's in Denver too? He was just a recently retired quarterback. Is he still with the Broncos? Anyways, I'll try to find it here, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
More time on this. Davis Webb. That's who I was thinking of.
Oh yeah.
Quarterback that, retired, then immediately became a quarterbacks coach.
Yep. Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. And anybody who's kind of arguing against that, I feel like you're kind of living in the 90s and, not understanding the game and where it's moved.
With how many of my replies were just like, they just hired Tom Arth. I don't think that they were they have somebody that's in a quarterback's coach position right now. That's not what I'm talking about. Like, go look at it. He spent 2 years with Justin Herbert, and it was his third and fourth seasons in the NFL. What about his track record prior to that says anything about being able to actually develop a quarterback? Right.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's still early in the process, and we'll have a ton to talk about here for the rest of the off season. But it'll be really interesting to see how things come together. I think this team's got a ton of flexibility with the cap space that they have and the cap space they can open up. I think the draft actually aligns very well with the needs that we have. So I feel like there's a ton this team can do to improve. But for me, it's all about setting up 2026. I don't know if we know that Justin Fields is going to be the guy, but you definitely have to set this team up with as many weapons and be as sound and as solid as possible as a team going into 26. So if you do draft a guy, it's already a ready-made team. So that's kind of where my mind's at with it.
Oh, couldn't agree more.
Well, Smitty, I appreciate you coming on again. So hopefully this third time is a charm and we get some of these guys we talked about in the draft.
There you go. That's the way to look at it.
For all 30 of my subscribers, Smitty sent me a text message. He is expecting some cash payments for this. So if you guys can pitch into that, he's trying to get some money to show up here. So I appreciate that. I was cracking up at that text.
Just because I like you and Colin so much, I'll do this anytime for free.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate that because we probably don't have the money to pay you anyway. Oh, that was a good one. Sorry, it's a little bit of an inside joke to anybody still watching, but that was a pretty funny text message, buddy. So I appreciate you coming on as always. It's always a good time.
Yep, appreciate it.
All right. For anybody who's watching, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hit the notification bell so you know when we go live. Smitty, do you want to let everybody know where they can find you?
Oh boy, you can find me on all social media, Zachary Smith PGH. You can find me Monday through Friday on Steelers Afternoon Drive as part of SteelersNow.com. You can find us here on YouTube or any of your listening platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever your podcast from. And then I also do another podcast, Around the 412, a couple times a week on all the Pittsburgh sports teams. Again, Around the 412, right here on YouTube or also on all of your listening platforms. Other than that, I think I'm good.
All right, man. I appreciate it again, and have a wonderful evening, everybody. See ya.